as the Deputy Speaker of the Selangor State Assembly, and later served as the Selangor Executive Council, on the Selangor Executive Council for Education, Human Capital Development, Science, Technology, and Innovation. So may I please invite YB Tuan Nazmi. Next, we have Ms. Emma Torres. Ms. Torres is the Vice President for the Americas and Head of the New York Office of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN. She serves currently as the Strategic Coordinator of the Science Panel for the Amazon, as well as the Science Panel for the Congo Basin, and also co-chair of SDSN Amazonia. And between the years of 2020 and 2022, she also served on the Lancet COVID-19 Commission. So I'd like to invite Ms. Torres onto the stage. Next up, we have Professor Jatna Supriatna. He's a distinguished professor of conservation biology at the Faculty of Mathematics and Science and serves as the chairman of the Institute for Sustainability on Earth and Resources at Universitas Indonesia. His research efforts have resulted in the discovery of several new primate species in Indonesia, such as the Tarsius tumpara and the Macaca tongianus in the Tongian Islands, along with the identification of various hybrid animals in Sulawesi. So his excellent academic research has earned him the numerous accolades, including the Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the Golden Ark from His Royal Highness Prince Berhad, and the Habibi Award in Natural Science, and the Terry McManus Award from Conservation International. So I'd like to invite Professor. So last but not least, our very own in-house Professor Mazlin Mokhtar. Professor Mazlin is the Deputy Head for Research at UN SDSN Asia, Sunway University. Prior to this, he was at the University Kebangsaan Malaysia, UKM, where he held key positions as the Director of Lestari, the DVC, and the DVC of Research. He has served on various committees, including the Chair of the Environmental Committee of Academy of Sciences Malaysia, Chairman of Malaysia's Environmental Control Council, and Chairman of the committee appointed by the Malaysian government to review the Linus Rare Earth operations. Professor Mazlin is a recipient of the Langkawi Awards 2018 and the Professor Emeritus Award of UKM 2022. And just a bit about his background, he has served in Sabah for 8 years as an academic lecturer at University Kebangsaan Malaysia Campus Sabah. This was prior to it becoming the University Malaysia Sabah today. So I'd like to invite him on the stage as well. So before we go into the questions, I'd like to invite Yang Berhormat Tuan Nik Nazmi to give an opening statement to open the panel. Yep.
Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera, very good afternoon. Moderator, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this panel and to this workshop. And I think, you know, one of the things that I've learned in the job is the role of the science panel to be able to break through boundaries. Because, as we know, a lot of things that we do internationally, including the COP process and whatnot, those are things that are multilateral processes which involves nation states. And sometimes there will be bottlenecks when you work through this, you know, through the government for various reasons, geopolitics, political instability, so on and so forth. So when you have the science panel, it is very crucial because it will allow evidence-based policy making to be done and as best as possible at sort of, it's insulated from as much as possible from all the political upheavals that happen outside. Because I think that is very crucial. But there has to be synergy, obviously. The science panel can inform, the science panel can provide guidance, but then the decision to make it work will still go back to us as nation states, us as governments on the ground. And we have then not only to be able to reach out to the various stakeholders when we talk about the academia, the indigenous communities and local communities, the private sector, civil society. But one of the most critical thing as well, I think is, and I think something that I'm learning through the process of holding this position, is being able to communicate the importance of protecting the planet to the public at large. Because that is where, and we've seen, I'm not going to mention countries, where we see the backlash against climate policies, against environmental policies, is when the public perceive that when we try to protect our planet, it comes at the cost of our livelihoods, which is not true. But, politicians want to get votes, they want to win, and sometimes, or oftentimes, they lie. And that is the role of the science panel. But we need good politicians to be able to communicate, to rally support, so that we can implement the right policies. Because a science panel alone, without the support of the nation states, without laws on the ground, or without having multilateral understandings at the international level, then we will not be able to achieve these objectives. Because this is a big task indeed. So I do not want to say too much, but I think it is very important and for us to be able to build on what has been achieved. If you look at the biodiversity aspect, what has been done in the Amazon, what has been done in Congo, and the Congo Basin, and we have here actually in Borneo, in Southeast Asia. But my dream is that we can grow it even bigger, because the whole of Southeast Asia is actually a very critical part of not just biodiversity, but it's also the most exposed, or one of the most exposed regions to the climate crisis as well. So we need to protect that, and we need to be able to do this at scale with a science panel that covers the whole region. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussions after this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yang Ahmad. So I will start with a round of questions first, and I'll give each of the panelists about 3 minutes to answer very quick questions before I open to the audience. And so for the sake of the audience, I guess we'll go with Ms. Torres first. The question I have here is, can you elaborate a bit about what does the science panel for the Amazon and the science panel for the Congo actually do in terms of scope of work, its mission, and how will you compare the difficulties of the operation so far between these two science panels?
Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to hear the minister also introducing the panels. It's fantastic that he is endorsing the issue that science and evidence-based are fundamental for policy making, but also very important that policymakers have to reach out to different audiences and the different stakeholders. So this is exactly the spirit of the two science panels that we are coordinating, and of course of the Borneo. The science panel of the Amazon has as a mission to synthesize the knowledge, the existing knowledge on the state of the scientific state of the basin. And as incredible as it might seem, is for the first time ever that this had happened. There's been a lot of research on the Amazon by different countries, a lot of research in different issues that pertain to the Amazon, but had never been an assessment of the whole basin. And this is extremely important because not only because there was a whole coordination and dialogue among scientists, there are over 300 scientists working in the science panel of the Amazon, but also because this allows to understand the enormous connectivities that exist in the basin, connectivities of rivers, connectivities of forests, connectivities of cultures. There's over 400 cultures and indigenous groups that live in the Amazon. So that whole connectivity of culture is also very important. So it's been, I think, an amazing effort of the scientists that we generously contribute to do this. And the first assessment of the science panel of the Amazon is being cited as being the encyclopedia of the Amazon. The impact has been substantial, and I could elaborate much later, but just as an example, there are over 200 scientific articles based on the work that the panel has done, more than 500 media reports on the panel, so it's been really fantastic. That inspired the establishment of the Science Panel for the Congo Basin, which, as you know, is the second largest tropical forest in the world, essential for the earth cycle balance, and much less studied than the Amazon, much less research. There was an article in Nature of former ministers of environment of the area, as well as scientists, saying that it was essential to do some research on the Congo. And they quoted as saying that, you know, it lived like almost 3 decades behind in terms of research vis-a-vis the Amazon. So the effort of the Science Panel of the Congo Basin is precisely to synthesize now what is known and what is the big gaps. What are the major areas that would need research? The aspiration is to submit this first assessment for COP30 in Belém.
Thank you very much. All right, so I'm going to go to a bit more of a technical question now. So this is to Yang Ahmad. So this is related to the ecological fiscal transfers, the EFT program. And you just mentioned just now that there's always a concern about the balance between, so-called economic growth as well as conservation of the environment. But here we have a mechanism that perhaps seeks to resolve this. But the question is, could you please state with some clarity about the criteria that is being used to allocate these EFT funds amongst the state? For example, Sabah hosts around 60% of the country's marine protected areas, but it receives less than 10% of the EFT budget. This program that is supposed to encourage states to, or subsidize states is in a way to retain their natural resources. So could you explain the rationale behind this program and the distribution of EFT funds?
Okay, thank you very much. The ecological fiscal transfer was something we developed together with the UNDP, looking at models from Brazil, from France, China, and a few other countries. As we are all aware, in Malaysia, the control over land, forests, and the coastline, it lies with the state governments. And often enough, for the states, there's always this conflict in terms of the immediate needs of development, particularly for the states which are a bit more left behind. They would want to, and they tend to have more of these resources. So they need, to be able to get revenue for the government. They need to be able to, they need development, and so there is that pressure that exists over forests and other protected areas. So we started in 2019. The federal government paid a total of 60 million ringgit to the states. It went up to 70 million ringgit. And when the 10th Prime Minister, Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim, came into office, we increased it from 70 to 150 for the first year, 2023, 200 million ringgit for last year, and this year is 250 million ringgit. Going back to the issue of criteria, it has been a developing, it has been developed throughout the years, so it's not the same as it was in 2019. But the last framework is basically there is a threshold value which is just basically 200,000 ringgit as a base when they submit the basic required documents. Then the size of protected areas, and this is 70%. of the total funding will be distributed to states based on the proportion of protected areas relative to the total state land. And then there is a 30% of performance-based criteria, because so looking back at how they have performed in the implementation of their projects, the scope of the projects, and the effective use of allocated funds. So, but in 2025, as announced by the Prime Minister, we increased the performance-based criteria to 50%. Why? Because otherwise, the previous approach, certain big states with big forests or big protected areas will continue to benefit, but they might not do much with the money effectively, right? So by having it 50-50, it incentivizes the state to look at better ways to spend the money. The money is ring-fenced only for certain purposes, i.e. To increase the size of protected areas, to improve the infrastructure and the facilities within the protected areas, for some projects with the local and indigenous communities, so on and so forth. So if you look at 2024, although 200 million was allocated, but 190 million was distributed, and Sabah received 36 million ringgit. So this is actually more than 10% of the EF2 allocation for 2024. Because you have to look at it in total, including the land areas as well. Not just the marine areas, but we will continue to improve. One of the the demands of the state, which I'm open to discuss, is for some states actually just purely putting the money into conservation alone is not enough of an incentive. And I can understand when states are still grappling with roads, paying salaries and whatnot. So they say, can we allocate a certain portion to the consolidated fund? But we also have to be wary of some other problems that might happen. So we are looking into that closely to see whether that will be a useful way for people, because the idea is we want to do whatever is necessary to change the perception of protected areas for the states. So I think that is the desire from the federal government. So we are in discussion with them.
Thank you very much, YB, for that very detailed answer. We appreciate it a lot. And now I guess I'll move on to Professor Jatna. So one of the things that I also personally am interested to know about is one of the big events that's happening now in Indonesia is the movement of your capital from Jakarta over to Nusantara. In some cases, in a way to, shall we say, avoid certain aspects of climate change, shall we say. But the development of Nusantara itself will bring about its own changes to Borneo. So can you give some comments about what you think the impact of Nusantara will be to the ecology and the environment of South Borneo, let's say? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's really hard question, directly. But anyway, that's why it's very important to have science panel for Borneo. Because, of course, the plan for moving 3 million people to Borneo is really big. Not only to the development there, road, food consumption, and many other things, but also to the impact of the ecology and forest there. But there's a lot of pro and cons, of course, but I believe that there are opportunities. Means that, many people in Jakarta, member of parliament, minister, never had experience with the forest fires. They inhale the forest, the haze is very important, because in Sumatra and Borneo, there's so many already years, maybe 20 years, they already with the haze. So I think the opportunity to move there. And I see that what the plan is very good. What they plan is trying to have 70% of the Nusantara will be forests. So it's gonna be forest cities. So I think it's gonna be a very what maybe an example how do we develop these cities. But that's really in the good side. Of course, the bad side is, how that community with the incoming 3 million people from Java especially. That's going to be mixed, that migration and so on. The ecology, of course, the food consumption and many things. But the Nusantara sit in the very rich coal mines. Yeah. And that's really also how do we behave in the coal mine areas. Once, if the practice from Java, bring it to Borneo, there's going to be a lot of fire too, because Javanese usually every afternoon they always burn the small litters, and they're going to. That's the culture is also very important to be in. That's why the science panel of Borneo is very multidisciplinary approach. It will be scientists, but also will be cultural and also development economy, and especially the big things, of course, that mining, because Kalimantan, 70% of the Borneo, and is one of the largest production of the coal mine in Indonesia. So almost 70% of coal is coming from Kalimantan, which is Borneo. That's really the big things. The other one is also, of course, the plantation, oil palms and pulp and papers. And how do we make sure that most of the land they converted into oil palm and pulp and paper are really a peatland. As you may know, that peatland is so much catch to fire is easy, because if you dry the peatland, the methane will release, and that's really, and if you are Japanese culture, and they will always burn the litters, and that's really going to be disaster. So it's really between negative and positive thing about the moving. But I believe that the sciences can be really a very important role. How do we giving, as the minister said, giving the evidence base to the decision making is a very important.
Thank you, Professor Jatna. Right. So last but not least, so to Professor Mazlin now. So we have the science panel of the Congo, we have the science panel of the Amazon, and now we have the science panel for Borneo, right? And one thing I would note about this is that aside from its main objectives and mission, something that I guess would be more unique about Borneo is that unlike the Amazon and the Congo, you have far fewer countries. There's only Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei. Compared to the Amazon with many countries, compared to Congo with, shall we say, more complicated situation. So do you think that it would be easier for the missions and objectives of the science panel for Borneo to be achieved, given the, shall we say, a more simple geopolitical situation?
Wow. Thank you very much, Professor Jatna, YB Minister and fellow panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon. Yeah, as YB Minister mentioned, Borneo is just the starting point for the bigger, ambitious program of ours to look at the Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia has 10 countries. And of course, as Professor Wu mentioned, not forgetting the oceans. And of course, the second phase will include the Peninsular Malaysia, Sumatra, and Sulawesi. But as you mentioned, yes, that's why we picked Borneo, because when the challenge was given to us at UNSDS and Asia headquarters, how do we develop a science panel for Southeast Asia quickly? The best is to look at existing strength. And that existing strength had come to surface since 2007. That's about 18 years now. One is the Heart of Borneo program. There was a special agreement between Brunei, Indonesia, and Malaysia, looking at, of course, the forests, the Bio-D. And also about 2 years later, 2009, there was the CTI, Coral Triangle Initiative. But never mind, we focus on land first. So that's why for the past 2.5 years, we look around and we did the rallying of support among the preeminent researchers coming from very prominent universities in Kalimantan of Indonesia and also in Sabah and Sarawak. So some universities, nowadays we have, so far we have 6 universities in Malaysia and about 6 universities based in Kalimantan plus Universitas Indonesia and Universitas IPB, Institute Pertanian Bogor, plus Bank of Indonesia giving the financial support as well. So that is just the beginning. We really hope that with the chairmanship of ASEAN by Malaysia, we had a small chat with YB Nazmi in Cali, Colombia, with Emma as well. Maybe when the Prime Minister PMX took the leadership for the whole of ASEAN community, which is very ambitious, we encourage also YB Nazmi to take the leadership on natural resource and environmental sustainability. But this morning, we were very happy when we listened to Professor Jeff Sachs throwing in the challenge of maybe ASEAN, it's about time forming the ASEAN Development Bank, apart from the Asian Development Bank. And as we know today, if whatever we do, particularly into investment, businesses, and industries, everybody is thinking about how to protect the biod, the environment, and all that. And ESG is on top of that agenda. So I like to believe nowadays, if you have any sort of banks or financial investment houses, you need to think of the biod and environment as well. So this is how we look at the bigger picture. Very ambitious, but the science must come in, as Emma and Jatna had mentioned. That science do not only mean STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but I believe what is more important is the social sciences and humanity. No use about the science and technology, but we are still lousy in terms of ethics, in terms of social, in terms of humanity, and so on. So I think that's enough for now.
Right.
Looking forward to the second round.
Okay, thank you very much. I know you can go on, so I appreciate your self-control. So one thing to note, just to mention, Yang Berhormat Nik Nazmi will need to leave quite relatively soon. So the way that I will do it now is that I will open the questions to the audience. Please, we'll start with 2 questions first. And if you could you direct them to Yang Berhormat first, because then after that he may have to leave, and we'll continue with the rest of the panel after that. Okay, so we have, I'll pick one maybe question from the gentleman there, and maybe one more from near the back. Okay, so I'll read it there, right? Okay, so I guess we'll start with the question here first. Yes.
Okay, thank you. It's for YB.
Could you just describe your name and your affiliation?
Yeah, Dr. Farouk Musa. I'm a director of Islamic Renaissance and also an academic at Monash University, your neighbor. This is to Nik Nazmi. I think it's good that you mentioned about Malaysia's commitment to conserve the forests and stuff. But the thing is that I think from the report that I read, Malaysia has earmarked about 2.3 million hectares of forest for deforestation. That it means that it is equivalent to about more than 100 times of the size of Kuala Lumpur. And I think that is going to reduce the size of forests in Malaysia to less than 50%. So how do you reconcile that by saying that the government is committed to conserve the forest, and yet you have earmarked so huge land forest to be for this process of deforestation? Thank you.
Before, let's get the next question as well, then we answer both.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My question is a little bit transdisciplinary, if you like, or multidisciplinary in this case. I kind of feel like we have this missed opportunity. I wish that YB Nik Nazmi is here, Stephen Sim in the same session with KPT or higher education together, because we've been discussing the downstream issues here and this morning, earlier session. But then my worry is, now that we are in this university setting, my worry is the upstream issue. We were discussing about, okay, producing skilled graduates and whatnot. But do you notice that we only have 3 botanists, plant taxonomists in the country at this moment? Do you notice that? Speak to Professor Latif. He's worried. I'm worried. I'm young, but I'm worried already for the country because I want to jump ship soon if this goes on. So on the ministry side, and maybe Professor Jatna can share Indonesia's experience as well as Brazil. Are we ready? Because, okay, let me give a critical example. Say now that we are transforming into studying eDNA. But we need to know the DNA of plants, right? Say we are going into carbon market, right? We need to do biomass measurement for trees. Take mangrove, for example. There are 53 species in Malaysia. We only have allometric equation for only 12 species. How can you do carbon measurement, carbon accounting, when we only know a third or maybe less of the real number that we're looking for? So using estimates from Australia won't be right for Malaysia, right? So we have to advance this upstream as well as the downstream. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Audrey.
Well, something that has in common between the two questions is basically the issue of resources. When you look at the first question, we made a commitment in 1992 in Rio about keeping 50% of our land cover as forest and tree cover. Currently, the number is about 54%, 53 plus percent. We had some data going over the years because there are 3 categories of land, basically forest basically. 1 are protected areas, 2 are government forests. These are actually just government land, but it's idle and it's forested. Nothing is being done on the land, and it is forest, and it is not protected area. And 3 is basically private land. This is where you already have private owners. They may not be doing anything to the land yet, and it's forest for now, but it is private property, right? So what we saw is that over the past few years, actually the number of protected areas have increased. But what has gone down is the size of government forests as well as the forests on private land. So the challenge, what I can say is, again, because, and this has been, is the perennial challenge in Malaysia, and I'm sure it's experienced by other countries as well that follows a federal system, is because of the governance of these resources falls under the state. So that's why if previously what the federal government has tried to do, we followed the Selangor model where the amendments to the Forestry Act in 2022 basically any degazettement of protected areas must go through a public inquiry. 1. 2 is that any degazetment, it also has to, if it is approved by the public inquiry, then the government has to compensate the same minimum, the same size of land as well as a protected area, so that in theory there will be no reduction of protected areas in the state. We've done that at the federal level. It's based on the Selangor model, Selangor enactment. We've done that at the federal level, but the only state that has done it, and unfortunately is the smallest state, is Perlis, that followed the federal. Because whatever happens in the federal act, if it's not followed with a state enactment, it's meaningless, right? So that is why one of the things when we wanted to allocate this EFT, and I'm talking about Peninsula, right? Because Sabah, Sarawak, the governance is different, that's on their own. But just Peninsula alone, I said that, allocation of the EFT, we must look into, take into account of the states that are making these amendments to the law as well. Because otherwise, then why should we give them as much EFT as they should if they do not take into account of this? But it's a very complicated process. And, you know, carrot and stick, we have to convince, sit down. I sat down with the, I'm sure, well, I won't, the Menteri Besar of a particular state. They got 2 billion ringgit in flood mitigation projects. They got 500 million for water plants from the federal government. So I'm sure you know which state this is. This was with the Menteri Besar and the PM. So at the end, you know, I said, I have one small wish. I said, can you be more careful when you de-gazette your forest? Because you may get timber that's worth 500 million ringgit, but then your floods and the quality of water may require billions of ringgit, and you come back to the federal government. We don't get a single cent, or just probably some tax from the timber, but then you will come back for the money to, you know, repair all your water infra and whatnot. So we need to create that understanding. And I think this is where I believe, I mean, we know civil society is very active and we want to work hand in hand so that there is this general understanding that there is value to protecting our forests. Going back to that question of expertise, I think that again is another challenge. I mean, STEM as a whole, I mean, I know Dr. Mazlin was talking about going beyond that, having philosophers and whatnot. But STEM as it is in Malaysia, we are having challenges, right, to get enough people. So when you go into something that is even more detailed and more minute, it is a challenge, right? In the past, you know, people who did certain environmental disciplines and whatnot, they were complaining that there was not enough jobs, but things are changing. Right, but then if you go to the science, you know, the very detailed parts and all that, there are still challenges that we face, right? And again, the issue of resources. But that is why we are trying to fulfill, finally, this dream of having the Malaysian Biodiversity Centre. Because I think it's a shame, being a mega diverse country, that we cannot showcase this wealth that we have. So that is something that we are preparing, and we hope to get the budget and work with private sector, research institution, but also with you know, sort of a natural history museum component to promote greater awareness about our biodiversity.
Thank you very much. Let's go for another 2 questions. Okay, one lady in the middle there, as well as Professor Wong. I'll come back to you for the 3rd round, okay? So, Professor Wong, and I guess I'll start with Professor Wong first, and then please give the mic.
Hi, thank you, YB. My questions go back to your ecological fiscal transfer. I think that's great, and you have not been discriminating opposition state. The larger question here, when you say that the states don't have enough money and asking for part of the money to go into the state consolidated fund, should we actually push for decentralization to make the states more accountable for their financial well-being, but we will tie back on things like preservations of environment? Because what we are doing now is basically keeping a very centralized structure and hope to put bandage on it, right? Thank you.
Second question.
Hello. Yes. Hi. My name is Hui Shim. I'm from WWF. I'm based in Sabah. About YB, the EFT, 250 million this year, is a significant increase, but it's less than 0.1% of the total budget. So it's still quite small. So some argue that it's nowhere near comparable to the opportunity cost of, you know, keeping those forests. But anyway, my question actually is, can a significant portion of this EFT be ring-fenced to higher community ranges so that, you know, they can do restoration, enrichment, planting, whatever, and it creates jobs and the spin-off multiplier effects? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think Professor Wong was talking about decentralization. I know that's a pet interest and passion of his. Well, I believe that, you know, the reality is such, and I think in Malaysia, you know, we can see that the political dynamics is pushing towards decentralization, whether we like it or not, because you know, when people were saying, oh, it was tough doing the Water Services Industry Act amendment in 2004 because they had to deal with the states. But that was when one coalition had 90% of the seats and every state government bar one was under the same coalition, right? So then they said, now when we start to talk about, you know, doing climate change bill and whatnot, I said, this is a whole new world because, you know, even within the same parties, they don't agree. So, which I think is within reason is the spirit of democracy, right? So I told my civil servants, I did tell them, I said, you have to be prepared for this. You won't have the good old days anymore. And even then, there were that old dynamic. So I believe that it is happening anyway. And I think I agree that the move ideally should be towards more accountability and more transparency. So that should be how we hold them to account, right, and what they do. But, you know, I have a small brief that, you know, with regards to environment, natural resources, and climate change. So, you know, that is something that you know, is something bigger that we should look at the, you know, 13th Malaysia Plan and all that. On the issue of the amount, I agree that it is not enough, but there's a challenge, right? Because, and this is the whole thing about just transition. When you have a developing country and we have schools, we don't have enough schools. The schools that we have, the state of the schools are not to satisfactory standards. We have classes that go to 40 people. Our military ships, you know, we are lacking in military ships to police the South China Sea. So all these challenges, and it comes back to balancing all that, right? I agree that it's small, but I have to say that, you know, the PM and the Minister of Finance, they do, and the Minister of Economy, for example, including Ministry of Trade and Industry, they do give, I would say, enough, they listen to what we say at our ministry. And I think I appreciate that. But we really want to make the point, right? And I go back to think what I said about water plants and flood mitigation causing billions, but we are not spending enough in the long term. So I think that is the change of mindset that we need. And community ranges is something that has worked successfully. I think from our initial studies is that we have had positive signs with regards to the number of Malayan tigers, right? It's initial numbers. I mean, I can't say the number yet because it's not final. But why? Because we had the poachers, the problems of the poachers, but now we have nearly 2,500 community rangers overall, and a lot of them are focused on the tiger range states, and mostly they consist of the orang asli, the indigenous people, as well as military veterans. And I think it's a novel way. Like military veterans also, a lot of them at 40, they retire, they don't have enough resources. It's a novel way to provide employment for them. So we keep pushing for this to grow, right? And I have a lot of military voters in my constituency.
You do, yeah. Yes,
so, but nothing to that, nothing to do with that, right? That's secondary. But I think it's a very effective way. And I think if we use, because a lot of the things are natural to the indigenous people, and we should tap into that know-how. And like you said, yeah, it's a good way to bring them out of poverty, give them a good livelihood. And I think it's really good. We've seen other projects like in the Perak State Park, they had the Menrak ranges as well. So those are their own initiatives, which are all very positive for conservation.
Right. Thank you very much. Fun fact, I know exactly what YB is talking about for his constituency. I actually am from Setia Wangsa, so... So, but yes, I think Ms. Torres has something to...
If I may, I think it's a very interesting discussion and questions. In the case of the Science Panel of the Amazon, obviously the mission is to conserve, but also to advance sustainable development in the context of a tropical forest. So a number of policy briefs are dealing with some of the issues that are being raised here. For instance, what is sustainable infrastructure in a tropical forest? what is a sustainable city in a tropical forest. And I think here again, you know, when you're talking about the capital, it will be very good to have these discussions with scientists from the science panel of the Amazon. I think one of the critical issues that the minister was raising is the issue of, you know, we need financing, and we need substantial financing. These are, you know, if we want to conserve, these are large areas of the many countries. And one initiative that the government of Brazil is advancing for, which we hope is going to materialize by COP30, is a tropical forest forever facility. And the idea here is very simple, is that, you know, and going back to monitoring results-based performance, it's basically to areas that are conserved and are monitored for conservation, and they receive permanently resources from this facility. So this is very important because it, again, is one of the ways to channel resources for global services. The government of Brazil is leading on discussion. I'm sure it's in contact with your government, it's in contact with many governments, but we are hoping, and the target is to mobilize 250 billion. So they're working on that for COP30, and it's going to be a major item of the agenda then.
All right, thank you. All right, shall we go through at least one more round of questions first before YB you have to leave soon? Yep, okay. So perhaps the gentleman in the middle. Feel free to have questions that are directed towards more than one panelist, right?
Okay, thank you. My name's Andrew Koo. Question is primarily for the YB Minister, but I think from an Amazonian perspective, I think others can also speak. Firstly, happy belated birthday to the Minister for yesterday. So my question has to deal with what you have raised, Minister, which is the Orang Asli. Now, we know that from a ministerial point of view, the Orang Asli come under rural and regional development, so it's not your ministry. But they are so much a part of the challenge and the solution of sustainable environment. And so my concern is that they are being lost in the gap between the different jurisdictions of ministries. And if you talk to Chin Huat and he wants to talk about deregulation or decentralization, that's even going to be worse because the federal government has jurisdiction over indigenous peoples, but not the land. So they are losing out all ways. And is there a consistent and interconnected policy from the Madani government to protect indigenous peoples in Malaysia?
Right. I'm going to hold it to just that question, so we can go straight to the answer for that. Yeah.
Well, the answer is that not yet. I mean, I totally agree. You know, it falls under all these different jurisdictions, different ministries. I have a few dialogues a year, and I think you know, through some civil society they arrange for me to meet the Orang Asli, and they raise the issues of conservation and the challenges they face and whatnot. You know, they talk about the plastics that are in the rivers. They talk about the encroachment into the forests and other things, right? And you can see, because they are at the front lines. When you talk about deforestation, the Orang Asli is losing their supermarket. It's losing, you know, where they basically the source of for their homes, the materials for their homes, so on and so forth. So it's a major impact on them, and they're at the front lines. And I agree that we do not have, and something that we have to work on, right, to come up with a unified response to the issue, because otherwise, you know, this will forever be something that will be like political football between the different ministries and state governments.
Prof. Mazlin, I think he wants to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Jidan. Thank you, YB Minister. Thank you for the question, Ku. So in Malaysia, not only regarding the issues of Orang Asli that falls into certain areas that are crossing the jurisdictions of ministries and all that. But I like to believe that Malaysia is very advanced thinking and with beautiful vision. And for now, we also have this special council called the Malaysian SDG Council. It is anchored at the Ministry of Economy, but the council is chaired by Yang Ahmad Berhormat Prime Minister, and around the table are all the chief ministers, premier, and Menteri Besar. And all the key secretary generals of ministries are there. And Malaysia also formed a special SDG center, Pusat SDG Negara. Because as Emma mentioned, saving biodiversity nowadays is not simple like that. Like Jid-en posed me the question, Mazlin, is it easy to manage Borneo? Only 3 countries? No. Small or big or medium, same complicated, complex world that we live in. The issue is now, how do we address these complicated and complex issues? Everything is interconnected. It's nexus nowadays. You talk about biodi with water. You talk about water, food, energy nexus. Headache, pening. But we need to do it. That's why the Science Panel come in. That's why Malaysia has this Malaysian SDG Council, and underneath is the technical committee. And there are 7 working groups, headed by certain ministries, and also private sector headed by UNSDSN, Malaysia, and also CSO, Malaysian, APP-AGM, all party parliamentarian, SDG, and CSO. But anyway, my friend there from all WWF, they are nodding. But anyway, these are the challenges we are doing. A lot of issues we cannot tackle only, one issue, cannot. How do we address this complicatedness? And that's why it goes back to education just now. So, again, we are now looking at how to build up the new Malaysian blueprint. This is the time, ladies and gentlemen. Malaysia is taking the leadership. Indonesia have some great examples. Already some universities in Indonesia, they are already become pusat SDG negara untuk province. For example, Universitas Lambung Mangkurat. They form pusat SDG for Kalimantan Timur. I would like to encourage universities in Malaysia, think like this. Universities become SDG center to support your district, to support your state. As our Jeffrey Sachs mentioned this morning, having roadmaps and great plans, 25 years is easy for many countries, but how do you implement? And I like to believe to implement must happen at the state, district, and local authority level. And you just count how many universities we have in Malaysia, how many lecturers do we have? So many. So let's move in a new way. But we need you, YB, for the natural resource and environmental sustainability. Thank you.
All right. On that note, so I have a notice that says, YB Nick Nazmi, you have to leave soon. So we thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate, I guess we have a photo taking for this session. Yep. So for the... Thank you very much. And so. So, all right, let's have a seat. Okay, so let's continue on. I'll ask the next question because I have something to ask Prof. Jatna about. This is a bit about the comparison between Jakarta and Nusantara again. One of the big issues in Jakarta is that your rivers, shall we say, have a pollution issue, right? And presumably that is a lesson that Indonesia would not like to make again in the new capital city. What sort of actions do you think are being taken, or what you recommend to the government now as they build up this new capital city, not to repeat, in terms of what happened in Jakarta, specifically for the rivers?
Okay, I maybe have to let you know what Jakarta sinking is. It's about 20 centimeters per year. So Jakarta by 2030 is going to be half of them will be inundated by water. So the ideas of to have the giant seawall in Jakarta, it's really, really big things, government plan. But that's really cost $1 billion. So I think Jakarta has to move, the capital. Otherwise, people coming and more people. Now it's almost the whole Jakarta surrounded is about 30 million. That's really too many people. So by moving that, I think that's really lesson learned from Jakarta, how that the Nusantara will be. So the Nusantara can be really smart cities where 70% of those areas becoming forested. So that's really good ideas. Those are, we thought that in the beginning going to be converted all lot of forest, but I knew that most of those 250,000 hectares of the capital city, most of them are plantation. So they changed the plantation, belong to our president, newly president. So that's really good. So he elected. That's why I think it's really good that they have to move, sacrifice his land to be capital cities. But the challenge, of course, Jakarta and compared to Nusantara, that Jakarta sit in the alluvial soil, right? And Nusantara sit in the coal. So if you dig it in Nusantara, maybe 1 or 2 meters, there will be coal there. So that really, whether that we are going to exploit it, the coal, or not, that's going to be very interesting equation. And after that, I want to reply to Pa Aldi about that. The scientists, not so many scientists, especially related to botanists and many others. I think it's everywhere, similar. And also in Indonesia, especially at universities Indonesia, and it's not so many people like to be in the jungle anymore. They like to be in the lab. They like to be working in a very convenient way of doing or space to student. So I think we're losing also many scientists used to be very difficult. But, as you know that Indonesia possibility of having a carbon trade money, of course, is big. It's billion dollars. They have to be, especially in Kalimantan, because as I mentioned about that 30% of the Borneo island is a peat, and peat is about 5 times richer than the regional forest the forests in tropicals. So that's really what we need, is really more scientists to be trained, especially in the jungle. So that's my answer. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right.
Thank you. All right. So let's go to another round of questions. Maybe we'll take 3 questions this time, if we have enough mics. Do we have 3 mics? Oh, we can just... So there's one gentleman up there. There are 2 now. If we go to the one gentleman first. I know there was another gentleman here. Oh, it's left already. Okay, yeah. There are two. Let me to the person behind first. Yeah, and then the person in front, and maybe one other person somewhere else. Okay, so you go first. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Actually, I wanted to ask when the minister was around, but basically, my question is on the assimilation of this knowledge. How is the best to cascade it down not only to university, but also to public. I'm sure MS would know from your experience, and Prof. Jatna, how do we best assimilate this knowledge of SDG to the public and also for education purposes? Thank you.
All right. Second question, yes.
Thank you. I'm Romel Shamsuddin from Biodiversity Malaysia. One of the problems that we find in Malaysia now is that we have so many sound bites talking about sustainable development goals, solving biodiversity and so on. But when we look at the environmental problems that we are facing a crisis. For example, our rivers are cancerous right now. I wanted to ask the minister just now, is this as a priority, extreme priority area that we have to solve? Unfortunately, we haven't, he left earlier, but I will meet him again, inshallah. But talking about this problem, ASEAN has problems, big problems. And the only way we can solve this is we put our heads together and try to find solutions to solve it. For example, we are facing a 2-meter sea level rise predicted. And our cities, for example, Jakarta, Bangkok, are going to be flooded within 100 years. And that's within 2 generations, 3 generations. I think we have to work seriously now. We're not talking about sound bites anymore. We're facing an existential issue here that we have to solve. Even Ariel just now, the gentleman said, we only have 3 experts on plants. How about insects? It's shocking, it's worrying. We don't have that many biodiversity experts. And we have to get the next generation to really get excited about biodiversity because our existence relies on this. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Let's go with the answers first. Who would like to take up the answers? So that I guess Prof. Jatna or Ms. Torres? Oh yeah, sure. The mic, yeah.
I would like to address the concern raised by Samsudin on the Biodiversity Malaysia. So he's worried about the crisis, including pollution. You see, Malaysian, we are very good when there are crises, we get together. When peaceful time, no, everybody stay home, enjoy teh tarik there. When floods happen, everybody come. Give everything, Maggie, everything. This is why I would like to relate when we went through the COVID-19 public health pandemic. How do we rise? How do Malaysians come up and become a world example? My Sejahtera. Everybody took the responsibility, report if they have symptoms of COVID-19, they report on My Sejahtera. But when everything was over, that's it. My Sejahtera, lantak engkau lah. But this is where, I've mentioned this to Yang Berhormat Nik Nazmi, let's look at My Sejahtera. Let's imagine how we can apply My Sejahtera for My River Sejahtera. Yeah, if all of us, if each one of us pay attention what is the nearest tributary or a river nearest to us, and if we notice something is not right with that river, let's report it on My River Sejahtera. So a challenge to all the young people in this room, the next generation, please rise up to this challenge. My Sejahtera is still there, I believe. Let's think something like that. The other one was how do we assimilate the knowledge? This is where we look at Mission 4.7, transforming the education. And that education I like to see. Minta maaf tuan-tuan sampai habis bateri. I know my time is up, but please bear with me. Knowledge, education. Education, 3 things. Formal, informal, non-formal. So, somebody say, let's rise to this, and YB minister say, my civil servant. And I mentioned, let's go down and implement SDG. So, BioD is not only about BioD alone, but SDG implementation. So to implement SDG, developing country like Malaysia, we all look up to authority who has the mandate. And at our district, we look up to district officer. District officer has the mandate from chief minister and state government in terms of natural resource and environment. So I would like to say, assimilation of knowledge must happen at the district officer level and local authority level. Why local authority? Why district officer? District officer is in charge of land, water, fishery. Local authority give license for development, for businesses. There is where we can control. How important are district officer? 171 persons. If you count, if I got it right, 171 district. Local authority, 155. 171 plus 155, 326. BMW lah. 325 or 326. These are the key people, I would say, Malaysia must focus. Choose carefully the 325 people. Give them good salary and grade, because they are the ones that have to shoulder the SDG at the local level now. Cannot simply appoint district officer, local authority like before. There are already calling of let's have a local government election and so on already in Malaysia. So, Malaysia boleh tak? Kuat sikit? Terima kasih. Rasa macam politician pula, minta maaf.
Prof. Jatna?
I think that lesson learned from Indonesia is really that the government committed to biodiversity, which is now what you call it, the mainstreaming the biodiversity into development, which is in the Ministry of Planning. So the Ministry of Planning now is really has a power to either the fiscal policy to the local, but also local government, but also that really the biodiversity. Not only ecology, but also how much that the biodiversity in the state, the state province that has biodiversity to be conserved. The fiscal policy is also part of the algorithm in the Ministry of Planning. So mainstreaming is a very important to the central government. And that was really has to be taken as the mentioned by Mazlin about the SDG hub. So SDG center is a very important that most of them now is, most of the big university has SDG hub or SDG center. So that including that some of those are biodiversity in the center. So that really my 2 cents.
Okay. Yes. We have a question from the audience and one more afterwards. Could you raise your hand if you have a question, one more in the audience, whilst we listen to that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have been talking a lot about educating the people on SDG. I think the most effective way is to bring the people to the forest, experience it firsthand. If you really experience it, stay there half a day, 1 day, or then you can really tell that what is the forest offering to you that money cannot buy. Okay? This is experiential learning. There's no, after experiencing this, there's no need to talk anymore. There's no amount of explanation is needed. Who will be the target of these people? We should bring them to forest and experience. The politicians, the leaders, okay? Those who make decisions, okay? And including hopefully our royal people, because our royal, if they take the step, everyone will follow. We are very loyal to our royal. So these are the people who we can inspire by bringing them to the experience.
Not to interrupt you, but what is the nature of your question?
This is my suggestion.
That's all right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
I hope this can be done. Thank you. Okay. And all the organizations dealing with SDG, they can get together and bring people to site visit to the
I'm not
forest.
strict as,
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Well, let's have the question up there. Yes. Please make sure it's a question. Yeah.
Okay. My name is Farol from Ministry of Economy. My question to Prof. Mazlin, because I saw in the introduction, I heard in the introduction that you involved in Linus. Yeah. So my question is, in the rare earth, we are going to, this is new growth area, but we have so much problem in getting Linus operations and reputations, whatnot, so forth. So what narrative has changed now from previous narrative into now becomes from the point of environment? And second thing is related to that, this is also related to radioactive management, whereby we now seriously potentially considering nuclear power as one of the potential source of energy in the future, if that happens. So what sort of consideration we should give based on experience we've seen in Linus into that, let's say, potential solution? Thank you.
Really? Okay, thank you, Dr. Fakrul.
I think that's a significant enough question that we can take it on its own.
Thank you, Dr. Fakrul. He is the Deputy Director for the Pusat SDG Negara, Malaysia SDG Center. Okay, regarding with rare earth elements and the experiences of Linus, which is headquartered in Australia and here, that sort of processing, Malaysian government took the stance at the end of the day. When they send raw material to Malaysia, they must make sure it is cleaner. It is much lower than the stipulated radioactive level. And in fact, the radioactive levels is actually comparable to the background radioactive levels. But the concern of many in Malaysia is, radioactive is like Fukushima. Actually, it is not. But never mind, that is Linus operation. Now we move into the current era, where in Malaysian forests, mainly, we discovered that from predictions of Jabatan Mineral Geoscience, in the forest soils of Malaysia, in all about the 10 states in Malaysia, there are worth about 809 billion ringgit of rare earth. And with the approach of the global level, and Malaysia included, that we want to maintain our forest cover and all that. Of course, if you imagine you are Menteri Besar and Chief Minister and Premier, you cannot go into deforestation and logging at a big scale. So you look, there are the rare earth elements. And also for Indonesia, you have some other rare elements which are needed by the current industry. For electric vehicles, for batteries, for all the important gadgets in which all of us are guilty. We are utilizing that technology. So there is a high demand for rare earth, and if you notice, they will put the NR in front, non-radioactive rare earth elements. That means it's almost about zero radioactivity or very tiny. But of course, this is still contentious. So what do we do? And if you look at what Nik Nazmi and the country had done, quickly they asked experts from Jabatan Mineral Geoscience, Department of Mineral and Geosciences, and experts from universities and the practitioner. They form a committee and quickly they come up with national non-radioactive rare earth elements mining, the standard operating procedure. And I believe the guidelines of the standard operating procedure to do proper sustainable mining, that means try to minimize or zero-rise the impact, is there. So please look out for these guidelines. And some of the states are already utilizing these guidelines and already wanting to capitalize on bringing revenues for the state. So that's one. Number two is nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, if you like it or not, if you look at even at the global discussions which is happening, including at IAEA and all the institutions involved with utilizing clean energy, nuclear is one of them. And Malaysia, I think about 10, 15 years ago, we already set up a special committee to look at these aspects, but suddenly it disappeared, and now I think it's resurfaced again, and Malaysia is also putting on consideration to bring in back nuclear energy as one of the relatively cleaner source of energy of the future. So there you go, 1 more minute. Yeah, battery is still there. But anyway, Malaysia is forever progressing and keeping up with knowledge which is ongoing in the world. But this is where science panels come in. Experts on energy like Professor Leong Yun Ying. Tomorrow you must come for the energy discussion. You come back and ask again this question about nuclear energy. Okay? I just give a teaser. Detailed answer from Prof. Leong Yung. Angkat tangan Leong Yung? Ada. She will prepare a better answer tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Torres, would you like to?
Just a couple of comments. And I think one important thing is, you know, this opportunity to move in the capital and really dream and construct a sustainable city. And I think this is critical, and I think you can use, you know, experiences that are going, reflections that are happening on this field. So this is very significant. Second is about the issue of scientists. In the 80s, Brazil launched a major program because they really want to understand the Amazon. So they launched a major program, the Science and Technology Ministry, together with NASA. And they trained over 1,000 PhDs. And that was a revolution in terms of the knowledge of the Amazon. Right now, we're trying to do a similar effort also in the Congo. This is not part of the science panel of the Congo, it's part of the sister initiative. But it's important, it's extremely important to build the scientific infrastructure to really transform the models of sustainable development for that region, for these tropical regions. In the case of the science panel of the Amazon now, we have a major initiative, which is to promote the next generations of scientists for the region. We just created a small group of 12 youth leaders on science. But the idea is, again, to go and make incentives, what was saying one of the gentlemen, go into the forest, investigate in the forest, research in the forest, living in the forest, and also at the same time bring in all the things that we have in the cities: internet, good health, and good education. So this is the major challenge, but I think it's exciting in terms of, you know, collaboration and knowledge sharing because among the tropical forests that we have here. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Ms. Torres. I see at least one hand up, so we can go to the lady in the middle. Is there another question in the audience? Let me just check.
Thank you very much. I'm Lavanya from WWF Malaysia. Thanks for all the sharing. This is just a quick question to Ms. Torres. It would be very nice to hear from you a little bit more about how the cultural aspects have been first studied and also incorporated perhaps into policy making. And also what are the skill sets that, you know, in terms of scientists or, you know, the type of people that you might need to also really capture this very important aspect of culture. If you could just share with us how that's been done by the science panel of Amazon, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. The panel from the origin, we had indigenous people scientists, and I think this has been critical, is now further expanding because as I mentioned earlier, there are over 400 indigenous people communities in the Amazon that are still living there. So we are mobilizing all that knowledge and culture. I think the panel is expanding further now to deal much more even with culture as such, but also expanding in terms of the membership and getting many more indigenous people scientists, people that deal with culture in the Amazon. So the next report, which is going to be ready for COP30 in Belém, and as you know, is in the core, in the heart of the Amazon, is going to have a tremendous component of connectivity of cultures and value of culture. So it's been actually a very interesting process. We had from the beginning indigenous people scientists, but there's also been a lot of policy papers discussing of the dialogues of cultures. I mean, not just integrating the culture, but really dialogue of knowledge between the indigenous people and also the Western scientists.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have another question from the audience? Right. Oh, there's one up there. Yeah.
Thank you very much for nice presentation from all the speakers. My name is Azmuddin Abdullah. I'm a biotechnologist. My question is to Prof. Mazlin. I've been reading about Nenggiri Dam, hydroelectric, and I call it mengembirikan Nenggiri, meaning we are actually destroying and making it not sustainable. In fact, hydroelectric power, I don't think it's really sustainable because we are destroying environment. So my question is whether we should put more pressure to the government to stop this Nenggiri, because we have what 15,000-year-old caves that used to be inhabited by prehistoric man. These are the history that's going to be destroyed once it's all underwater. So maybe through this workshop and conference, we can come out with strong words to the government that some of these should be left alone. Look at what happened to Bakun, for example. It's all this gone now. Kenyir, gone. So this should be preserved. We invite people from outside to come and visit Nenggiri to see our prehistory. So that's my question and my comment.
Thank you, Azimuddin, the biotechnologist. Very difficult question. I'm imagining I'm the minister now.
Yeah.
Very difficult. Yeah, very difficult.
Prof is already practicing to be the politician.
But anyway, this is where really science needs to come in. I'd like to believe that the government of Malaysia will say, yeah, when we develop certain projects, EIA must be done. And normally in Malaysia, they say, yeah, EIA has been done. And part of that EIA, certain projects like hydropower dams must have detailed EIA. And detailed EIA must have a series of community engagement. And normally, if you look on either on paper or you double check, the process is like that. But again, state government, imagine, I like to imagine we are Menteri Besar, Chief Minister, Premier, we need to think of what are the alternative revenues for the country. And also looking at the vision, as Prof. Sachs mentioned. So to say who's right or wrong is very difficult, but this is where science need to come in. So Azimuddin mentioned, maybe we need to put a stop. But maybe the government, state government would say, what are the scientific evidence? Come bring to the table. Of course. When I mention science, it would include the social science and humanity and history included. If you look at the Encyclopedia of Amazon, a lot of history is there. And that's why now we are encouraging Science Panel Borneo, Science Panel Malaysia, Semenanjung, Malaysia, Sulawesi, Sumatra, and Southeast Asia. You must bring every bit of the science, including science of the history and culture and everything, the social science and humanity, and the ethics as well. So not easy. So somehow or other, because whatever is happening in terms of natural resource and environment is the power of the state government, as what Nazmi mentioned just now. So I guess on our bit, we have to go back to Nick Nazmi, and hopefully he can become the good moderator, mediator. And nowadays, there are a group of experts who are good at mediation. So we must find this good mediator so that historian, geological expert, sustainable development expert, forestry expert, everybody must come to the table, mediated by the Mr. or Madam Master Mediator and the state government and the federal government. We must have that sort of request now through Yang Berhormat Nik Nazmi. If Nik Nazmi pun rasa pening kepala because of the cross-sectoral issue, then let's write to PMX as chairman of the Malaysian SDG Council, I would say. And mind you, when we say about sustainable development, there are a lot of pathway trying to achieve. If you talk to Ibrahim Komo, Global Geopark, National Geopark, in which heritage and culture is a component of a geopark. If you talk to Dato Latif, biodiversity. If you talk to Professor Dato Noraini Mokhtar, oh, coastal and ocean. So everybody there have their own agenda. Biosphere reserve, so many things. World heritage site. Malaysia is very good. You name the committee, Malaysia has it. You name a blueprint and roadmap, Malaysia has 2 or 3. But how to implement on the ground? I think beginning 2025, clever people, wherever you are, particularly in universities, SDSN was set up. Why? To bring in all the expert, the knowledge generators, the researcher. Don't remain comfortably in your room as Jatna mentioned. Come out, come out. And if you stay in jungle, cannot be day trip, cannot. Stay with the orang asli. If you can have pusat, apa tu, pusat latihan, what do we call it, for the youth, we send for training, for the army training? PLKN. Part of the PKLN, we ask them to stay in the jungle for 1 month. Yeah, to absorb, to breathe, to feel the environment, not half day. Not half day. Half day, they come out. Where the chicken come from? Supermarket. Where the money come from? From the wall, ATM machine. Like that. Must stay there. Breathe it. But anyway, very complicated, complex. We all need a comfortable life. 75% of population in urban areas now. No more wants to live in semi-urban only. Problem, problem, problem. But whenever there's a problem, there's opportunity. And if you ask Malaysia, Malaysia, boleh. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Prof. All right, do we have a final question? Otherwise, I will have a final closing out question to end this panel. All right. So, do you have a question or a suggestion? Okay, yeah. Good question. I'll hold you to it.
Okay, we have big problems, but we are mentioning science. Do you think we can solve this beyond science? Because science still cannot explain everything. Many things we still don't understand, especially the traditional wisdom. So if we want to solve problem, if we just ask the scientists, so it's not going to solve problem, right? So we need to ask the traditional wisdom people, orang asli. We need to respect everyone's knowledge. What is your comment on this? Thank you.
Okay, I think that's I had a similar closing question, but it was more along the lines of, given what you've seen and what you've worked on in your respective fields, how likely is it that people as a whole will change their minds in time? So it's something similar. Like, so I guess we'll go from Prof. Mazlin all the way to Jatna. Like, what is your opinion about that whether we can inculcate traditional knowledge into trying to resolve some of our issues, and how much of society do you feel in your respective fields would be able to change the mindset in time?
We can. When I was spending 8 years in Sabah, I was observing how Sabah government transformed from a state that relies a lot on logging, on forest products, and they transform into gazetting a big area into protected areas, and how they shifted into ecotourism. Under Sabah Parks, if I'm not mistaken, last year they reported income of ringgit Malaysia 54 million through ecotourism. So it can be done. Okay. Why? Personally, in 2005, I was a secretary to a Malaysian expedition, Maliau Basin. At that time, Maliau Basin is not yet a protected area. Sabah government was in between whether to extract the first-class arang batu, the coal, batu bara. They were contemplating. But in the end, after several years, they declare Maliau Basin is a protected area. And now you look at, if you Google Sabah, Maliau Basin, Danum Valley, Imbak Canyon, Damai, D-A-M-A-I, protected area. Tun Mustafa Marine Park, the same. We were commissioned to look at studying Tun Mustafa Marine Park. When we completed, we gave it, I think state government appoint WF. WF and state government took about 11 years. In the end, state government of Sabah declared Tun Mustafa Marine Park 1 million hectares conserved area. So yes, it can happen. You must be patient. It cannot happen in 11 months. It should happen 11. One more thing is Sipadan Island. Too many tourist operators were on Sipadan Island. Again, the scientists were asked to do a study. Already there is seawater intrusion. We advised Prime Minister Tun Abdullah at that time. So instruction, all tourist operators get out of Sipadan Island. Let the coral reef recover. It happened. How did it happen? We formed a steering committee co-chaired by State Secretary of Sabah and Chief Secretary to the Government of Malaysia. Around the table are all the Directors General of important ministries. Second tier are the scientists. So already it happened. Science feed in scientific information. So what happened today? Sipadan Island coral reef recovered. They control the number of scuba divers into Sipadan Island to 120 scuba divers only. Go during sunrise, sunset, get out. That's how science can make a difference. But scientists, be patient. Politicians, be open-minded. Younger generation of politicians of Malaysia, we have high hope towards you. We really do. So we scientists, the senior ones, we don't retire. Once we retire, we become emeritus. After emeritus, we become super emeritus. We transfer the knowledge to you. And some of the good scientists also become ministers today, like Yang Berhormat Sim. Yeah? So it's happening, ladies and gentlemen. Malaysia boleh? Boleh. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Torres?
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting, very interesting discussion and questions. I would like to highlight that the Science Panel of the Amazon has engaged since the launch of the report in a systematic dialogue with different stakeholders, with the financial sector, starting with the multilateral development banks, with the national development banks, obviously with the government and policy making, both at the central level, at a municipal level, and also at the regional level, because the basin can only be managed ultimately with a regional perspective. And I would like to highlight that they also have focused on policy briefs that are addressing emerging and important issues. And one of the issues that they have worked a lot is on social bioeconomy. What does it mean, social bioeconomy in the tropical forest, in order to be potentially an engine of sustainable development? And Brazil was the president of the G20 last year, and the G20 has adopted the principles of social bioeconomy. And again, it's going to be an area that we can see expanding. Second, a very important initiative that came from the panel is the whole issue of restoration. we're going to conserve, but we also want to restore lots of, there's a tremendous potential on restoration. And the National Development Bank of Brazil, which is one of the largest development banks in the world, launched a major funding initiative at Dubai, precisely on restoration. So there's a lot of expectations, and I mean, we had a meeting in New York as a side event of Climate Week, and a number of investors came to that meeting. And yes, it's risky in terms of the financial perspective, but it's also risky in terms of the restoration itself. So the need of having scientists involved while they do restoration is very important, in order to draw lessons, in order to share lessons eventually with within the region, but also with other tropical forests.
Thank you very much, Ms. Torres. So lastly, last but not least, Prof. Jatna.
Yeah, I like that the discussion goes. I think it's almost similar where I think discussion in many countries like in ASEAN, I think almost Malaysia, Indonesia, almost similar. That really, how that really the traditional communities to be involved on the decision-making process and so on and so on. But to be honest, I think because Indonesia has thousands of NGOs and they are really working really well. And I think that there's so many examples of how successful if the traditional wisdom and bring it to the central government. For example, currently, about 12 million hectares of the forest is belong to agroforestry that managed by local communities. So that's really successful, I guess, that even they like to have 20 million, which is about 20% of the whole total of the Indonesian forests. It will be managed by community. That's really big numbers. But of course, there's a challenge, It's not really think that when you are giving to the local or community will be safe. Some of them are really giving to the companies and to many other, poachers and many things. So that's really important to see. The other one is also because of the new law recently passed on the conservation. So new law that number 32, 2024. That allow that the local community participate in the conservation areas, which means there used to be an only central government, but now they allow to be, have a concession, small concession in the conservation area. That really making that really conservation more dynamic right now compared to previously. The challenge is that always, like, now we have new government. Of course, the changes. We thought that we're going to be, good fight for that, but new government was really, really challenged. So whether that going to be pro-environment or whether like to have 8% GDP, which is, that really way of that context, because 1% GDP means maybe 1 degrees of the global warming. So I don't know whether that we really need to be more scientists to go and come. The good thing about this science panel of Borneo, for example, now is connecting between the 6 big university in Borneo, and as Mazlin said, but also with the other side, Malaysia and Brunei. That's really going to be, local. And I think it's really the local government also now has this power compared to previously. So I think that's going to be very exciting dynamic between the government, the universities, which is the scientists, and also the local communities within the Borneo. I think that's really my point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Jatna. Can we give the whole panel applause? All right. I think with that, we have come to the end of the panel as well as today's session. We will see you all tomorrow. I think it starts at 9 or 9:30. 9. It starts at 9 tomorrow, just to be clear on that. And thank you all for staying this late, and I hope you have a good day for the rest of today. Thank you.
Thank you all. Just an announcement that we do have 3 panels set for tomorrow, so I look forward to seeing all of you for an equally exciting day too.